And welcome back. If you remember in the previous video, if you're watching these in series, however, if you happen to stumble across this one, there'll be a link in the description below to the playlist that starts the performance build series on our 2012 Red Ram here. But in the previous video, we removed the intake, torque converter to flex plate bolts. We disconnected the exhaust collectors at the bottom and also removed the oxygen sensors from the exhaust. So underneath, there's still a couple things to do. I'm sorry, yesterday we also took the starter out as well. So underneath, we still have the bell housing to engine block bolts to take out. And then we'll have to loosen up the bolts for our motor mounts. Now, yesterday I made a comment that I also want to see about just go ahead and taking the water pump off. So we're going to do that as well, just so we can also disconnect our heater hoses going to our cab. And that will also allow some of that residual coolant that's still in that block to go ahead and drain out. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to grab some tools, bring it back underneath, and we're going to see how many of those bell housing bolts we can get out underneath. I want to say, if I remember correctly, I think there's 3 per side. And the very, very top one is actually easier, if I recall from doing this previously. It's actually easier just to reach it from the top rather than underneath, unless you've got a swivel and a lot of extensions. But we'll review and kind of cover that when we get underneath there. But let me grab some tools, and I'll bring you right back. One moment. And welcome back. One thing I wanted to mention before we get started further is that occasionally on these clips, especially when I'm filming in the garage, you may hear what looks to be a little bit of a background rumble. And where that is coming from, just to explain that, is the air conditioning unit for the main house is right outside the garage wall. And unfortunately, it's loud enough, even going through 2 walls plus insulation. The GoPro picks it up noticeably in the clips, and there's not really much I can do about that other than to shut the AC off for the house when I'm filming, which I really don't want to do that now with the heat that we're getting right now, plus with individuals in the house needing the AC. So the best I can do is just kind of work around it, like right now, and it's quiet and not running. So I'll try for that, but occasionally if you do hear that little background rumble, just let you know that's where it's coming from. So it's not, you know, an artifact or something with the camera or something with your headset or anything. It's from the house AC. So with that said, let's continue. And there's 3 bolts on each side. 1 bolt, at least they used here on the driver's side, also on the passenger side, but here on the driver's side, 1 bolt up above the starter, which comes in this direction. So from the engine block back, so it threads in the opposite way. And there's 2 more. You can see one right here holding on to a clamp that's holding on to some of our evap and fuel lines. And you may see the other one, which is right above it, right there. Let me get the light back on here because I just hit it with my arm and turned it out of the way. There we go. So you have the one here which threads in from the opposite side. You've got these 2 which thread from the transmission into the block. You got one here, and you got another one right up here. And that's the one that if you got enough swivels and enough extensions, you may be able to get to this one and the one on the opposite side from the bottom. Or you may have to just kind of reach in through the center now that the intake's missing in order to get that very top one. I'll try it from below, and if I can't get it to break loose, I'll get it from top. I did notice this as well. It'll be interesting to see if it's the same bolt size on the top or on the other side. But the bottom one here was metric, as it's supposed to be, and this one's coming in at 9/16. So I don't recall the 2009 we did having that. Usually a mix of metric and standard usually wouldn't come that way for the factory. Normally that would mean that somebody lost the bolt and just replaced it with something else. But anyway, that's what we ran to on this side. The bottom one was metric, and this bottom bolt is different from the other 2 on each side. And just to show that to you, that's the very bottom one on the driver and passenger side. And again, that threads in from the opposite way in. So I'm going to work on trying to get these other 2 bolts out of this driver's side, and then I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So just want to show you, we got all 3 bolts in the passenger side, and the good thing is this truck isn't too terribly high up off the ground, so I can actually reach up in here with my hand and get to the 2 top bolts, as well as the one here on the side of the transmission. And just like the driver's side, the bottom one's metric and the 2 that are towards the top are both 9/16. So I guess since this one threads into the transmission bell housing, this one's a metric thread, and the ones that are threading in a block are a standard thread. I don't have a reason for that. But just be mindful of that. You know, bring yourself a metric set and a standard set, unless you want to do like I did and you come down here thinking it's all metric, and then you got to crawl back out and go get a standard set. If you haven't done so already on this passenger side, go ahead and unclip this ground cable right here. And it's usually clipped to the metal shielding over here on the passenger side, right above the catalytic converter. What this is, it's a braided ground strap that gets bolted across both cylinder heads. So you'll need that one to be obviously unclipped in order to pull the engine out of here. And it looks like this one's getting ready to break up here at the top. Yeah, it's getting pretty twisted. That's just, like I said, it's just a little bit of a grounding strap. You know, the engine itself has its main ground, but I guess they felt the need to put an additional smaller grounding point in the back of the heads. Let's see. So you can either disconnect it, because there's a couple bolts across each top, and pull this out, or you just want to make sure that this doesn't grab anything on the way out as you're pulling the engine up. So we got 1 more bolt to get. There is, yeah, so there is 3 on each side. We've gotten 5 of the 6 out. We need to get the top one on the driver's side out, and then we'll move on to the next step. So I'll bring you right back. One moment. And welcome back. So I just want to show you what I was talking about here on the driver's side. Hopefully you can see that extension that we're on that bolt. And utilizing, as you can see, just a few extensions, you can actually reach up over all this plumbing and then grab the bolt. Then you end up somewhere right about where the tail shaft of the transmission starts, but at least we can get a ratchet on it and we get to it from under here. Now, obviously, with the caveat being, we got a little bit more space on this side to deal with because it's a 2-wheel drive vehicle, so we don't have the, you know, the transfer case, the front drive shaft, and differential and stuff kind of getting in our way. But either way, just to show you that it can be done. So we're gonna get this last bolt backed out, and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So you can see that we went ahead while we were underneath here and just took the nuts off of our motor mounts. Now, if you can kind of see it here, each bolt just sits down inside of kind of a U-shaped cradle that's cut out into the bracket that comes out of the frame on both sides. So we went ahead and just took those off just in prep, so when we get ready to lift the engine, once it clears those, so we should be able to lift the engine up until the point it clears those brackets, the frame brackets, and then we should be able to start to, you know, just kind of easing the engine forward. Let's see, each one of these motor mounts also had a little metal shield in front of it. I'll show you that here when we get crawled out from back underneath the vehicle. But at this point, we've got all the transmission bolts out of both sides. We've got our motor mount bolt loosened and taken off, but obviously we're leaving the bolt in there because that's what's currently still supporting the engine inside the mount. And what we'll do next is I'll bring you out, I'll show you those little metal shields that were in front of those, and then we'll get the water pump off. And then once the water pump is off, we should be able to hook up our hoist adapter and attempt to get this motor out of here. So I'll bring you back in a moment. And welcome back. So as promised, these were the metal shields that were in blocking off the main nut for the motor mount on each side. There's a slightly different shaped one for the driver versus passenger, but they were just placed over it and then secured in with an 18mm nut. And then the main bolt itself is also 18mm. And once again, on the transmission side of the house, transmission block to bell housing bolts, I should say, this is the bolt that was on the bottom corner of each, and then up from each one of those in each corner up a little bit higher were one each of these. And remember, we discovered that this was a 9/16 and this bottom one here is a metric. Matter of fact, let me get you the size of the metric on that one. Yeah, 16. So looks to be 16mm on the bottom, and then 9/16 for the two up above it. And so just be mindful that when you're taking these out, that some of these are also being used to hold in various like dipstick brackets and piping brackets, things of that nature. So, like I said, with that being out, let me get a template put together that we can put our water pump bolts into so we don't lose track of what needs to go where. And then I'll bring you back in a moment. And welcome back. You can see we got our foam taken out of our center area here. We're in the process of just getting ready to remove the VVT solenoid because it has to come out of there in order for the engine hoist adapter to clear it, because it has a section that comes down over here, and if this is in the way, it won't bolt up. The two bolt holes it uses, you can see one's unoccupied because it's going to bolt into here. We've got to remove a Christmas tree clip here, and the other side will bolt over there, and you'll see it more, and it'll make sense once we get it in place. So we just got electrical disconnected from our VVT, and we're going to back this bolt out. And the other thing is, with removing this VVT, we can get a health of the engine, so to speak. In other words, you may have not heard it in the previous videos in the first build series when we were rebuilding the interior and doing other things to get the truck roadworthy. But if the truck sits for an extended period of time and then starts up, it has a pretty good clatter to it. Now eventually that clatter will calm down the more it runs and the more you start it to the point it goes away. So to me it sounds like it's got a lifter that's bleeding all its oil pressure down and just is quite noisy upon startup until that oil pressure inside that lifter builds itself up. So it'll be interesting to see if we see any metal on that VVT solenoid, and if we do, then that'll be the sign that we probably have early lifter failure, as well as we'll get into looking at all this in the subsequent videos when we start doing the tear down of this particular engine. But for now, I'm going to get that bolt taken out of there and get ready to pull this VVT solenoid out, and we'll see what it looks like. One moment. And welcome back. So we got our VVT solenoid out, and it's definitely an older unit because you can see the screens on this one. The newer ones are made out of all metal. And don't worry, we got a newer one to go in it. You may not be able to see that there, but there's some little bit of glitter right there on that screen. So it's just starting to get some fragments in there from something. Now, I'm speculating that that's going to be the beginnings of lifter failure just based on the noise. Hopefully it's a lifter and not something on the bottom end. But even if it is something on the bottom end, again, we're going to send the short block out to the machine shop and have them look over it. So if it needs a new crank, then obviously we'll put one in it. It's going to get new pistons because the pistons are going to be 30 thousandths over bore. But yeah, we got a little bit of glitter in there, but thankfully not a lot, but we do have a little bit. And like I said, that is an older one, and you can tell the difference because you can see all these screens in here. And like I said, the newer ones are made out of metal, and you'll see the newer one when we go to do the reassembly. Also, if you look back at the 2009 build, we put a newer one in it as well. Let's see, so now that we've got that out of the way, we need to get the Christmas tree clip off of this, which is holding down one of our MDS harnesses, and that way we can start to get that in place. But like I said, let's tackle the water pump next, just to get it out of here, to give us a little bit of extra breather room, I guess. And I'm going to show you a trick that Scott Rods had on his channel when he was rebuilding his Hemi. And I'm going to go snag me a piece of corrugated to draw this out on, and I'll bring you right back. One moment. And welcome back. So I saw Scott do this on his channel, and I've done this ever since because I thought it was pretty slick. And I'll put links in that should appear in the upper right hand section of your screen to both his channels, as well as in the description below. But what you can see us doing here is that we've got the replacement pump on just on a piece of corrugated or cardboard, wherever you may live, and we're going to trace this out and then mark the bolt holes. That way, as we are taking the bolts out of the pump we're going to remove, we can put them where they're going to be, because this, as you can see, this pump has several bolts to it. Let me turn that more to the kind of the way it looks inside the vehicle. And it has several bolts to it, and a lot of those bolts are different lengths. So we just want to make sure that we get them, back in the right spots that they came from. So I'm going to trace this out, I'm going to mark it, and then we'll start taking bolts out of the old pump. So I'll bring you right back. One moment. And welcome back. So you can see we've got our, and just as the air conditioner kicks on, good timing, so you'll hear that little bit of rumble in the background. I apologize. So we got our heater core hoses disconnected, and you can see we've got our template drawn out here. And as we take the bolts out of the locations, we're just putting them into the cardboard in the location using the new pump as a template, so that way we keep track of what bolts go where. Now, some of these bolts I will be ordering new ones for, such as this one right here. You can see it's got a nice bit of corrosion on it. I mean, you could probably reuse it, but I mean, we're in here. It'll be I found these bolts before. I just got to find them again. It's a bit of a challenge because there are so many different ones, and they're all different lengths. It takes a little bit of searching through Mopar's various parts websites to make sure you find the right part numbers. But I guess I'm rambling. We're going to continue to take bolts out and put them into our template, and then once we get that done, we can get the water pump out of here. And yes, we did move our little concrete mixing tray, as you can see, a bit more forward, just so we can kind of catch everything as it starts to drip. But I'm going to get this water pump out of here, and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. As you can see, we've got the water pump off. We're just letting it just kind of drip and drain a little bit into our pan. And when you're done with your little cutout, you get something that kind of looks like that. Again, just a little bit of a guide to help you keep track of where the bolts were at, where they need to go, because like I said, a lot of them are different lengths from each other. They're all the same size bolt. They're all except for one, 99% of them are 13 millimeters. And you have one 15 millimeter. It's that one right there. It's kind of off to, I don't want to say quite off to itself, but that serves another purpose. That's a studded bolt, and that actually secures the brace for the air conditioning lines when you have the intake on the vehicle. So just remember, that one's a 15, and again, all the other bolts are, what is that, 13? I believe I said 13. Oh, 13. Yep, 13. Sorry, getting a little hard to see in the old age. Okay, and there we go. There's our pump. You can see that somebody put some kind of gasket sealant around this. You can see it here like right there. So I put a thin bead of silicone on there. You're not supposed to do that. This rubber ring that you see right here, this is your seal. There really isn't a need to put RTV on these water pumps. Now it may be that somebody took this water pump off and and then decided that they needed to reuse it, so they just put a little bit of sealant around it. But you can get this seal by itself and just replace it, because you can see here that it is flattened out in quite a few areas, so that'll definitely cause a sealing problem. But if you can, just buy the actual gasket and replace the gasket, in lieu of using RTV. But the new pump is a factory pump. Not only does it come with new temperature sensors, but it'll also come with a new gasket as well. And you can see more remnants of that RTV here, so we'll have to scrape that off. And probably about 3 or 4 of the bolts that held the pump on were pretty corroded when we took them out, because it looks like they go through some type of coolant passage on the inside. So what we'll have to do is just order some replacements for those. So no biggie. We're going to let this continue to drip for a little bit, and then when we bring it back, we'll start prepping to get our hoist hardware on here. So one moment. And welcome back. So you can see we got an adapter on. Now the adapter, as you can see, kind of mounts here. Has this little kick plate that goes around that bolt I was telling you about earlier, and that bolts into the main piece, and then the main piece bolts into those 2 bolt holes that we cleared up earlier. This one we had to thread chase a little bit because the Christmas tree clip was in there and a little bit of rust got in there, but once we thread chased it, it's fine. But what they don't want you to do, what you shouldn't do with this bracket, is don't use an impact to tighten those bolts up. Just hand snug them up, and that's about all that you need. Because they don't want you to strip those out or potentially break one of those bolts, because that would suck. But as you can see, that's, once you get it all tightened up, that's not going anywhere. So now that we've got this kind of where we need it, we can then just now come in here and grab one of our chains here. And the reason why there's 2 chains on here is that this was the setup we used to get the 2009 engine reinstalled. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a picture of this, because I want to remember those positions, because it worked good for that, putting that engine back in. And I'm going to take these excess chains off, and I'll more than likely just hook up to the center loop that's here, but I'll probably move this more to be more center to the bracket rather than forward to the engine. And again, it's just getting it out of here. So I'm going to concentrate on that, and I'll bring it back, but that just give you an idea of what that bracket looks like. And that's the reason why that VVT solenoid had to be removed, because you can see right where this bracket kind of comes up to. It would hit that solenoid if it was in place. Okay, so with that being said, I'm going to get some tools cleaned up around here, clear ourselves a path out in front of the truck, get those chains situated, and then I'll bring it back and we'll see if we can work on getting this engine out of here. One moment. And welcome back. So we kind of got a setup here that we think is going to work. We're dealing with a couple of variables here that we normally don't deal with. Is the fact that we've got the truck up on the lift, so it's adding a little bit of height to the vehicle, because obviously you can see it down there. The feet of the engine hoist have to get underneath the front bar of the lift, so that's adding a good couple of inches to our setup here. So we've got some extra chains on it, as you can see there, to accommodate for that. I think it's just going to take a little bit of a song and dance, unfortunately, to kind of get this thing out of here. We may have to fall back and regroup and seriously consider removing the headlights, the front bumper, just to get this cross member out of here, to give us a little bit more breathing room. We've got the condenser kind of pushed a little bit out of the way. Remember, we didn't discharge the AC, so we really don't want to remove that condenser if we can get around it. Now, if we can't, and we absolutely have to, then we'll have the AC evacuated, and then we'll proceed accordingly. But Where we're at right now is that we've got our bolts off our motor mounts. We got to come up a couple inches to clear the motor mounts, because remember, I don't know if you can see that down in there. Hopefully you can. You can see that motor mount is slotted, and it's about a 2-inch or so slot. So once we come up and the mounts clear those slots, we should then be able to kind of wiggle it and pull it forward to get it to clear the transmission. And then once we're out here in the engine bay itself, then just continue to hoist up on our engine lift until we can get the oil pan to at least clear this top radiator support. Now, putting the engine, as long as we can get the engine out, that's fine. That's the goal for this evening. And as far as putting the engine back in, once we have the old one out, I think I'm going to go back and go ahead and just disassemble the front of this truck and get this core support and everything out of there, because it would make for a much easier install without having to, you know, bring the engine up so high. But with that being said, what we're going to do is that we're going to work on this, and I'll bring you back and kind of let you know the status of it. I'm not going to be able to film this because it's a heavy object being hoisted quite high, and it's going to take some coordination of a couple of us here in the garage just to make sure this goes off okay. And it might be a little bit distracting trying to stop and film at the same time, but don't worry, I'll bring you along and let you know kind of how this setup worked, and then we'll go from there. Other than that, I'll chat at you a bit. And welcome back. So you can see we've got our engine hoist attached. Now this is going to be configuration number 2. I'm not going to show configuration number 1 because we're running into issues with it. The issue we ran into the first time was that even after trying to pull up on the engine to get it to clear the slots and the motor mount, it was wanting to pick the entire front of the truck up. So to me, it looked like the angle was off, where the boom wasn't far enough centered over the engine, you know, to kind of pick it up evenly, and thus causing it to bind. So we're going a little bit different route here. And just like we did with the 2009 we were working on, we unbolted the motor mounts from the engine block. So now the motor doesn't have to come up to free the motor mounts. We should just be able to pick up on it slightly with the hoist and then pull the engine forward to then get it to clear the transmission dowel pins. So we're going to try that now and kind of see where we get with it. I'm going to pull this transmission cooler slash air conditioning condenser kind of back up here and a little bit more out of the way, so we got some room to bring the engine forward. And we're going to see if we can get any more progress on getting this out of here. And once it's out of here, I'll show you what I mean by we took a little bit different approach with the motor mounts. So with that being said, I can't film as we do this because there's a lot of moving parts. It's a big old heavy engine. We've got to get it pretty high up in the air. So we need all of our concentration kind of on what we're doing here and not necessarily fiddling with the camera. But this is where it sets, and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So we've got it broken free from the bell housing at this point. So it's working by having the motor mounts disconnected from the block and just being able to kind of take a little bit of the weight and pull it forward. We were caught up on the knock sensor on the passenger side. I removed the one on the driver, but forgot to move the one on the passenger. And I'll show you why that was hanging that up. But we're making progress, and I'll bring you right back. One moment. And welcome back. So you can see we're making headway. We've got it broke loose of the transmission at this point, and we're just slowly kind of raising it up here and getting it where it needs to be so we can get it clear of the back cowl. And then hopefully get this thing out of here. Like I said, it's weird angles, and we're definitely going to have to see if we can get a leveler on it when we go to reinstall it. We're definitely going to take the time and take apart the front of the truck to give us the advantage where we can go a little bit more straight in when we go to mate this up. because again, the Hemi sits so low and so deep in that engine bay, you know, getting it out is, you know, like I said, it's kind of a pain, but it's doable. Let's see here. Okay, so I'm going to continue to work on this, and then I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. Well, you can see it's out. Let me tell you, it's been an adventure. And of course, like we said, anytime you're pulling an engine or doing an engine disassembly, and of course, yes, we're being mindful to be careful. We're staying away from being under the load. I'm not going to keep this up there any longer than we have to, because, you know, the heavier the weight, the higher it goes, the more danger that there is. So we're staying well away from it. But we discovered what was hanging us up and what made this so difficult to remove. And I'll show you that here in a second. Now, we didn't have this problem on the 2009, and nowhere in the book did it say that this had to be supported, but I think you'll find it interesting. But as you can see, we're going to clear the top riser with no issue. We're just going to take it. We got a drip pan underneath here because, like I said, anytime you remove an engine or take an engine apart, you get out 3 times the amount of liquid than you actually put in. So now that we got that taken care of, we're going to just ease it out and then slowly lower it to lower our center of gravity. And then we'll prep to get it onto an engine stand, and then we can go from there. So I'll bring you right back. Yes, and it made a mess, as you can see. Stuff is everywhere. And welcome back. So you can see we've got it a little bit lower on the lift. We went ahead and used an impact and buzzed off our flex plate. But before we did that, we went ahead and made sure that we wrote the word out, just so we could remember which side was outwardly facing. In case you forget to do that, I mean, there's kind of telltale signs, especially if it's a used one. Like, you can flip that over to that side and see all that rust, but with that center ring's nice and clean, that's where it was mating up with the crankshaft. So that would tell you that goes on the inside. Okay, so what we're going to do next is that we're going to get the engine stand out here, get this block picked up a little bit, and get this block secured on the engine stand, and then we'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. Well, it's been eventful. I'll go out there and give you a shot. There was many expletives, colorful adjectives, whatever you want to call them, said during this process. Lessons learned, but the important one is what you can see there. So we've got a jack stand supporting our transmission, and what had happened was that the book, nowhere in the book did it state to support the transmission when pulling the motor. But it makes sense, because in a four-wheel drive vehicle, the transmission has a brace that's braced to the side of it that is also the same brace the front differential would clip into, so it holds it in place. But in a two-wheel drive vehicle, you don't have the brace, and all you have is the transmission mount on the cross member there, which obviously isn't strong enough to support the weight of this. So what had happened was, and we should have known better, but surprisingly enough, the book didn't even say anything about this, which kind of surprises me, because it should have. That's why I say take your kind of service information with a grain of salt. But again, learn from my mistakes. What should have happened was we should have had something back here to support this transmission. So as the engine was trying to dismount from it, the weight of the transmission was coming down and basically binding against the rear of the engine, which is why we were having a hard time kind of getting it out of here. So once we kind of noticed what was going on, we got the engine the rest of the way out, and then just came underneath here and jacked the transmission up. And as you can see, just put it on a floor jack to support the weight. So when we go to put the engine back in, obviously this has got to be moved out of the way. So we'll jack a little bit further back here like we did to get this raised up to begin with. And we're going to have to support this with a jack until we get it mated back with the engine. So on the plus side, not that we wanted to do this now, we were going to do it later, but on the plus side, the torque converter's out. You can imagine how that happened. Transmission dips downward because of the weight, and torque converter slides out. We were going to replace it anyway. No harm, no foul. It didn't completely fall out, but it fell out enough to cause it to start leaking fluid. So I'm going to crawl out from underneath here and show you that we got the engine on the engine stand, and I'll bring you right back. And welcome back. Well, as you can see, the engine's out at this point. Also the torque converter with it. So I guess a couple of tips on this one would be, in our case, disconnecting the motor mounts like we were showing you earlier from the engine block helped out greatly. Just remember to remove the knock sensors as well. Otherwise, when you try to slide the engine forward, the knock sensors will hit the motor mounts. But disconnecting the motor mounts from the block allowed the block to then slide forward instead of up to clear those notches and then forward. The other thing being, just to say it again, and it's something that I missed originally because it wasn't in the write-up of the book. Not that that's an excuse, but I did miss it. Just make sure on a two-wheel drive vehicle that you do have something underneath there to support the transmission, because what was happening to us is as we pulled the engine forward to get it to release from the transmission, the weight of the transmission would then push down because there's nothing bracing it on this end here. So it would bend down and then start to bind up against the engine block. So again, just keep that in mind, but disconnecting the motor mounts from the block helped out greatly. And what we're going to do here, we're not going to do it in this video, we're going to do it a bit later, but I am going to look into basically just taking off the radiator support assembly. This will actually come off in one piece depending on how you do it. And I know initially I didn't want to take it down that far, but I think we're going to because what had happened, it would just make it easier, because with this thing being on the lift and having to lift it even higher up off the ground to get the feet for the engine hoist in, you saw it in the video, we're pretty high up in the air, and even though the engine hoist did have enough throw to lift it, just working this high up is rather inconvenient versus if it was down low and we could just, slide the engine in a bit more straighter, it'll make for a better time on the installation. So you should see that coming in a future video. And if I didn't mention it before, because it's recording the last of this the following day, to be honest with you, you can see here we did remove the power steering cooling core. So that way the hoses that were on this side would drop out of the way and allowed us to get this condenser dropped a bit lower and get it out of the way so we can get the engine out. And again, we're just only doing this because we didn't want to discharge the AC system. So we kind of have to play a little bit of Jenga games with it. But without further ado, you can see that we've got our engine on our engine stand at this point. Yeah, the hoist is still attached, but you can see there's no tension there. We're actually just getting ready to disconnect it. The engine stand has got the bulk of the weight at this point. And the next series of videos is going to be doing a teardown on this. And we're going to get into this and just try and discover where that little bit of metal fragments came from on the VVT, as well as what is causing that knocking noise when this engine sits for an excessive period of time. You get what sounds to me, it sounds like a little bit of a lifter knock until the oil pressure in that lifter builds back up and then it quiets down. So I think what we're going to find out is, and this is just my opinion at this point, my theory at this point is that we're going to find out that we probably have some lifter failure going on in this unit. Again, no harm, no foul, regardless of what we find, because again, we're going to strip this down to a short block and get it prepped to go to the machine shop for them to do their work. So awesome. Like I said, a little bit of fight getting it out there, having to work with the height, but we got a plan to get around that for the future. And the torque converter, if I didn't mention it before, you see that it has been removed because when the transmission kind of tilted downward, the torque converter started to slide out on its own, and we leaked a little bit of transmission fluid, not too terrible. And if I did not show that to you in a previous video clip, just to make sure that I do, there's the factory torque converter there, which, as you know from if you've watched the parts videos for this Ram, we're going to be putting the high stall torque converter in its place. And there, I'll bring you along for that one, because there's definitely some installation notes that we have to be mindful of whenever you're playing with any kind of torque converter. And with that being said, if you have not subscribed already, please consider doing so. If you have already, I thank you immensely for doing that. And I will bring you back for the next one. As you can see, we've got a lot of work to do on this yet. We're only getting started. We've got some cleanup work in here to do, as well as, like I said, the next series of videos is going to be an engine teardown. And then we'll be doing an engine build up, so it should be fun. That being said, I'll let you go and bring you back for the next one. Thank you much. Bye.